At Your Instep is brought to you by Comic Town and BCW Supplies.
Hello, and welcome to At Your Instep. My name is Mike, and I'm here with me. So, fun story, true story. Morgan's been sick this week, and Dave and I were going to cast without him. So Dave and I did cast without him for about an hour last night, today being Thursday. Of course, with Morgan not being here, we messed something up with the audio and only got 15 minutes of it. So we don't have an episode. But I wanted to get something out because we'd asked for questions from listeners, and I wanted to do at least a little bit with that. So this is going to be a fairly short episode, and for real, like not, normally we say short and it ends up being an hour and a half. This is probably going to be, if I had to guess, 20 minutes to half an hour. But I want to at least give you something, especially with the Open this weekend. We didn't want to miss out, so everyone's sort of recovering from their post-holiday, hangover sorts of things. So, well, I'm just going to go right into it. Let's tell you about the setup for the next few weeks here. Next week, we're going to talk results from the Open and the GP, and the week after that, after the pre-release, is going to be our Palooza, because the Palooza tends to need to coincide with that pre-release weekend. So we're not going to talk too many spoilers today, and we didn't in the real cast either for that reason. So we're going to talk a little bit about spoilers, a little lore stuff, and then we'll do competitive, which is talking about the Open and answering some questions this week. So in and out, and we'll be done. I hope I'm still funny, even if I have no one to play off of. I talk to myself enough, so I assume it'll work out. All right, so we'll start with rival spoilers. Only a couple things I want to mention. We got a pretty fun spoiler in Azor, and it's pretty awesome. So now we're going to do a little lore with Azor. Dave came up with that, but I'm stealing it because he can't be here to deliver the line himself. So if you don't know who Azor is, let's talk about the card here first. Azor the Lawbringer is 2 generic white, blue for a 6/6 legendary creature Sphinx. Has flying. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent can't cast instant or sorcery spells during their next turn. And whenever you attack, or whenever it attacks, you may pay X white, blue. If you do, gain X life and draw X cards. Now, for those of you who haven't been playing Standard for a while, that ability is fairly familiar. It's a card called Sphinx's Revelation, and that's because Azor is the creator of the Azorius Guild, which Sphinx's Revelation is from your Return to Ravnica. He was a planeswalker, a Sphinx, obviously, who supposedly traveled around and sort of is the reason why the Sphinxes, or Sphinxi, whatever, in the multiverse the way they are. And apparently went to Ixalan, and as you can tell, he's a creature here, not a planeswalker, so he lost his spark. Assumedly, he put his spark into the Immortal Sun. So that makes sense. But it's kind of cool. This is a random character to bring back. He is the one who caused the Guild Pact to be drafted, and assumedly, he's going to meet the Living Guild Pact. So it's either going to be really cool or really awkward. Especially when Jace leaves, because regardless of what happens, Jace is going to leave. But it's a cool little thing. And it seems that he is the one who's in, this sort of lost city that we're seeing in here. And it's kind of cool because being a Sphinx, he's also set up some puzzles. So we got this really crazy land today, which was Azor's Gateway. This is 2 generic for a legendary artifact. It says pay 1, tap it, draw a card, then exile a card from your hand. If cards with 5 or more different converted mana costs are exiled with Azor's Gateway, you gain 5 life, untap Azor's Gateway, and transform it. The flip side is the Sanctum of the Sun, and this says tap, add X mana of any one color to your mana pool, where X is your life total, which is an absurd line of text to ever be printed on a Magic card. But it's really cool because the front half of it is a puzzle that you have to solve. But you definitely get rewarded for solving that puzzle. This card feels so satisfying and possibly disgusting. Like, you could also, never actually hit that many CMC differences, and you don't want to exile those cards from your hand and everything, but that's the puzzle, figuring out what it is. So I think it's really cool and flavorful that fits in with Azor, that, you have to do his cool little puzzle to get to him. But it's interesting. Overall, we'll have the full spoiler a little bit quicker than we would for other sets, and I'll save full set, reviews for, again, the Palooza, but it does seem like there's some spice in this set. Some of the tribes seem to have gotten pretty powerful. There's a lot of really interesting merfolk. 2 mana lords for vampire and merfolk is also pretty spicy. But I'll talk a little bit more about those in a minute here. One card I do want to mention, talking about listener questions, that we were asked if I kind of like ascend more, and it was asked around the card Secrets of the Golden City, which is generic blue for a sorcery. It has ascend. It says draw 2 cards. If you have the city's blessing, draw 3 cards instead. Now, Dave and I talked about this last night on our aforementioned deleted cast. But I actively think this card is fairly bad, and this continues to show why the ascend mechanic isn't really great on a lot of these cards. Divination is not a card that sees play anyways, and some people argued, well, yeah, once things like Glimmer rotate out, but you also have like Hieroglyphic Illumination, and Inspiration is almost already better than Divination at just a pure common level. This also costs 2 blue to cast, and the deck that would play Divination is the kind of deck that's only really making land drops. It's not playing a lot of other permanents, so I guess when you play your 10th land, you get to draw 3 cards, but most of the time if your control deck gets to land drop 10, it's either a mirror, which is welcome then, or you've already wrapped the game up, like once you're in 10th land time. So I don't know. There's a couple of these cards that are interesting. There is an Infest card that creatures get -2/-2, but if you have Ascend, only creatures your opponent controls get -2/-2, which is cool. But that still suffers from the, well, okay, I'll just kill one of your creatures in response to it to maybe turn off your Ascend. It still seems fairly loose. There is a land that I thought was at least a little bit spicy for Ascend, which was, I'm trying to pull the name of it real quick. I'll have to look for it. Anyways, it was essentially if you have Ascend, you can tap it in 5 mana to draw a card, and it taps for a colorless, which is, that I think is more if you're looking for something a control deck would play. Like, most of the time the control decks can get away with playing a colorless land. They actively look for a little bit of utility in their lands. So that's the kind of card that is probably a little bit more exciting. Here it is. It's the Arch of Erazka. And I mean, it's pretty good. You can only draw a card if you have the City's Blessing, but if you're paying 5 and tapping this, you're already at 6 anyways, so that makes a lot more sense. So that's the kind of card where that mechanic makes sense. But 10 permanents is so much to ask for a lot of decks that I don't know. Maybe it'll be okay, but a lot of the cards haven't excited me. Not that the set hasn't excited me. It's doing a little bit of work, but that mechanic is still just not really for me. But anyways, yeah, so that's where we're at with Rivals. Again, we'll do the Palooza in a couple weeks, and we'll look at those things more, but I can't say if I think it's going to really change up Standard, but it does look like at least one real deck, that being Merfolk, may come out of it, which may be enough to create a better metagame, so we'll have to look and see. Before I move into competitive, I do want to take a moment to mention one of our awesome sponsors, that's Comic Town. Comic Town will be running their pre-release events the weekend of the 13th and the 14th, so you should come on down to the shop. They always have multiple events. My wife and I normally go down for 2 at a Giant. It really is a good time, and the new shop is so large that they run the multiple events, and you don't feel cramped like you might have before. It feels really nice, actually. So you should come on down and check it out. All right, as far as competitive goes, obviously there weren't any tournaments last week. Everybody won New Year's. You did it. Congratulations. Just proud of everybody, really. But we have an open this weekend in Columbus. Star City will be in town, and it kind of feels nice. For a while there, we got, I say we being players in Columbus, got pretty spoiled by having these tournaments in our back, sort of our backyard, and having them here in the beginning of Columbus feels right. And we have Modern, which is the best format and the people's format, and I think we're all excited here. Now, I know Morgan wasn't feeling well, but I think he is planning on playing still. And I know he was teetering between Tron, because he's a monster, and also Eldrazi and Taxes. Dave is definitely also coming, and he's playing Blue-Red Through the Breach. Like, it's essentially Blue Moon with the Through the Breach combo, so a little bit spicy. He tested out a bunch of decks, including Storm, but he really wasn't that confident with it as far as going into this event. So myself, I'll be playing some version of Jeskai Geist or Jeskai Tempo. There's a lot of lists I've been kicking around and looking at, but I played a lot of Death Shadow recently. And I'll talk about that in a minute with one of the questions, but I just needed a deck that didn't feel like it was like living on a razor's edge anymore with just so many tight matchups. So I think it was an article on Star City today, Brad Nelson's premium, so I apologize. But I mentioned this idea of how Death Shadow is still very good, but it sort of pushed out all of its free wins, all the decks it used to prey on. So now it has to work really, really hard for every win, and you feel that when you play it. So I just want to move away from it for a little bit, and I love some Celestial Colonnades. So, but what we've done is we had asked players, listeners on Twitter and on Facebook to ask some questions that they had about Modern as a format in general. So I'm going to try and answer some of those. I said, Dave and I did this, and it'd probably better not to just have me doing this, but I'm what you got, and beggars can't be choosers. So, though I don't know if that's actually an apt idiom, but you're going to have to deal with it. So our first question comes from Bob MTG on Facebook. Bob's a pretty great player from the Indianapolis area. I can speak. And I'm glad to hear from him. He says, is Temur Battle Rage worth it in Death Shadow builds? The newest thoughts from the professional MTG Brain Trust say it is. However, from my experience, you win the same amount of games without Temur Battle Rage as you lose, since Temur Battle Rage isn't a relevant disruption spell. I understand that Temur Battle Rage does help you against a random field, but does that make it worth it? And I just started talking about Death Shadow a little bit, and this is a good question. I will say, if you listened before, I am firmly on the side of playing Temur Battle Rage right now. The list that I ran at Regionals, which is I think the last major Modern event I played in, was close to Ben Friedman's list that she had posted on GatheringMagic.com. But he really advocated going back to Battle Rages, and in testing, it really seemed appropriate. You're definitely right that it does not do anything when you draw it otherwise, which is kind of awkward for a deck that, again, is as tight as Death Shadow is. Every card outside of maybe a counterspell, depending on the board state, really does a lot of work. It either draws you more gas, or it's a creature, or it's disruption as far as a counter magic or a discard spell. It does a lot. But Battle Rage does let you win games you just couldn't win otherwise. And that includes against things with a lot of blockers. There's a lot of decks like Affinity being one that can provide a lot of small blockers, or any Lingering Souls deck where you really aren't equipped to win the long game, especially against something like a Siege Rhino or a lot of Tarmogoyfs. So having something like Battle Rage where you can present a lethal attack through some of that is pretty important. Also against some of the combo decks, or big, I will say big mana decks like Tron. Dave and I both played the really aggressive Death Shadow Zoo deck when it first came out, and matches like Tron were almost a buy because you could so effectively go underneath them. But now you don't really get to do that, and cards like Ugin sort of lock the game out. A Karn can, depending on your mana. Wormcoil Engine's very tough to deal with, especially if you're running just like the more current lists that have more dismembers than terminates. Or Kolaghan's Command isn't enough, so it can be a little awkward. And Battle Rage allows you to get in there, go under again, to get in some faster attacks. Because a lot of times against like Tron, one really large Death Shadow is not going to be enough to get them done before a Karn or something comes down. And, as good as Thoughtseize stuff is, and yes, you hope to have Stubborn Denial, but it doesn't beat the top of the deck, and, Tron is pretty redundant. So I like having Battle Rage of those kind of matches as well, where you can just get through. I also like it for Burn. Playing in Regionals, I played against Burn twice, which is not exactly an optimal matchup for Death Shadow, but Temur Battle Rage lets you sort of, instead of playing a game where you have to play very carefully, as you always do against Burn, but instead of being on your back foot the whole time, it really lets you lead your opponent. Especially if you have an early discard spell, you can start walking your opponent down a line into how you want them to use their mana, like what spell is going to be effective on what turn, and Battle Rage really shines there. You can just sort of surprise them with that. So I would take a look at that, and if I were going to play Death Shadow this weekend, I would play Temur Battle Rage. That's just where I'm at. I would play Temur Battle Rage. So, good question though. Moving over to Twitter, we have a question from Brian Dawes at MTG Lord of Leaves, and he asked, "Should I switch from elves to merfolk? How much sleep will I lose, and how deep should I sink the dagger into Azuri's back if I make such a change? Do you think any of the new merfolk will make the muster for modern merfolk?" Yeah, I have to say, I don't really know, and Dave sort of said the same thing last night. Sorry, that's my puppy. Neither of us have a lot of experience with elves. Merfolk I do. I played modern Merfolk for a little while, but elves has just never been my deck in any format, to be quite honest. So I don't know. I would advocate the change because I think that Merfolk's a better deck than elves, but having not played them, my input might be fickle. I will say this, I wouldn't stab Azuri too hard because the guy can regenerate and also pumps the team. So I would just sort of be one of those things where like you just stop returning his phone calls and you slowly let him, you'll realize that you're finished, and then hopefully the next time you see him, he'll have calmed down. As far as the new merfolk, I really do think that some of them have a chance to see a little bit more play. Obviously, blue-green merfolk is already becoming as common as just mono-blue merfolk, and that's because of some of these cards in in Ixalan. So Rivals offers a couple of interesting ones. I will say that the most obvious one is Merfolk Mistbinder, which is just a blue and a green 2/2 Lord. And while that's not maybe as exciting as any of the other ones that offer Island Walk, it may be better than like a Regery because it stays at 2, so your Vial can stay at 2. Again, I'm not totally certain on that, but it feels like any 2-mana Lord is going to be at least deserving of a look. I also think one of the new cards they spoiled, which was Kumena, Tyrant of Araska. This is a generic blue and a green for a 2/4 legendary creature Merfolk Shaman. It has 3 abilities on them. The first is tap another untapped Merfolk you control. Kumena can't be blocked until end of turn, or can't be blocked this turn. My apologies. Tap 3 untapped Merfolk you control, draw a card. And then tap 5 untapped Merfolk you control, put a +1/+1 counter on each Merfolk you control. And this feels pretty powerful as well. Now, Modern isn't exactly a format where you want to dirtle with a Merfolk Crypt Breaker, perhaps, but there are definitely matchups where you could. The Unblockable, I think, is important as well. And pumping the team is never too terrible. Plus, this is a 2/4. And I think that's pretty important because it gets out of range of Bolt pretty quickly, or immediately, I should say. But also like stays out of range of some other random spells and helps pump the team as well. So I think that could be, maybe it's not good enough. We have a number of good 3-drops now that you can play in Merfolk, so it probably has to do a lot more work. But I will say that if you're going to move closer to the Collected Company builds and away from the traditional builds, then you're going to have to replace those Master of Waves with something that fits a little bit better. And this could get the job done. So yeah, I definitely think that some of these Merfolk that are being printed are going to continue to be helpful. Next question is from Duress to Impress, which I got to tell you, Duress to Impress, choice name, always loving it. He asked for tips for playing against rogue decks. Dave and I talked about this a little bit last night, and we both sort of came to the same consensus, which is you really, the scenario I presented him was, as far as rogue deck goes, to say your opponent plays a really obscure land turn 1. What does that cause you to do? And and he sort of mentioned that he's played long enough that he has a fairly encyclopedic knowledge of the game and its cards, and I feel the same way a lot of times. If you're well versed in Modern as a format, then whatever card you see should help you sort of start to navigate what is going on with your opponent. Truly rogue decks, and there's a lot of them in Modern. I mean, at regionals, I know a good friend of the show, Brian Keller, he came out of retirement from Modern to play the Humans deck and played against a Norin the Wary combo deck. So you never know what you're going to see. But there are cards you can anticipate. Both main deck and sideboard. Once you see what your opponent's doing, you should be thinking of what combo cards could they be playing, so you don't get surprised. What hate cards could they be playing? Might this be a deck that has Blood Moon? Might it have Ensnaring Bridge? Could it have things like Rest in Peace or Celestial Purge or anything, or Stony Silence out of the board? So that's really the first place to start, is to consider where they're coming from, what their deck is going to present. Beyond that, though, I think you just need, if you are playing a proactive deck, then you can really sort of ignore it a little bit and just, make them have whatever they're trying to have. If you're reactive, though, you've got to play a bit more carefully because there are some weird cards that are legal in Modern. The format is so huge. I was telling Dave, like, what if your opponent played, turn 1 snow-covered plains? What decks could you play? Could you be playing? We put them on maybe like Martyr. It could be on or we said Scrying Sheets as well. It could be like Scred Red then. And then I told them, they played Plains after that, and they started playing Soldier Tribal, which is an obscure deck, but it does exist in Modern. It's one of those things where you might calm down once you start seeing like a Soldier Lord, like Keldror, whatever it is, and then you're like, oh, okay, this is fine. And then they just swarm you, as those kind of decks tend to do. I know at Monday or Modern Monday at Comic Town a couple weeks ago, I saw a person who cast Vampire Nocturnus, and they flipped the top card of their deck, and it was a black card, and their opponent died to their attack. So sometimes there are going to just be instances like that where you've got to be careful. You know, Modern already feels like it's a bunch of rogue decks just because of how varied the field is. So you can really only benefit from just paying attention, using resources like MTG Goldfish, paying attention to what cards are showing up. One other thing I would say about playing against rogue decks is make sure you don't tilt. There are a lot of people who tend to come off pretty negative towards rogue decks, and they'll be like, I can't believe I lost to this. But that's kind of the point of beating or building a rogue deck, is that you can catch people off guard. So try to respect it. Next up, we have Harburg, at Harburg on Twitter. He asked, why aren't either Dave or myself playing Black Red Hollow One? Because... Well, my answer is because I want to play a better deck. Dave's answer was because it has neither Island nor Sapcaster Mage, which is kind of his bread and butter in Modern. To be quite honest, though, it's just how the deck is constructed. I'm a person who doesn't enjoy a good aggro deck. I really do. But the aggro decks I like are either super consistent or offer a little bit of selection. Or even something like the Grixis Death Shadow deck that I played. It felt very all-in, just like this deck does, but it was all-in at doing the same thing every single time. This deck does not do the same thing every time consistently. Its starts are super explosive, and there's a lot of cards in it that I love, but I am not the kind of person who wants to pay money to cast Burning Inquiry. It is not in my blood. It just does not does not scratch that itch, so to speak. So I will avoid that. And I think Dave said pretty much the same thing. Obviously, neither of us can argue with the things we've seen that deck do, but I can argue with all the times you'll play Burning Inquiry and be left with an unplayable hand. And once is too much for me. I will personally will not be able to get over the rage I will feel inside. So, despite all of my rage, I will not play a Black Red Hollow One with a Graph Digger's Cage. I really wish someone else was here that could have stopped me from continuing that joke. Morgan would have cut in and been like, okay, I get what you're doing. And I wouldn't have had to get to the punchline and felt as bad about myself as I do right now. All right. And one more question. This is from Aaron Hammer, who asks, what is your plan against UB Mill? The cheeky answer is, don't have one. I don't. I know that it's a deck that is a more serious answer, but I know that this is a deck that's gained a little bit of popularity. Obviously, Glimpse being reprinted made that card a bit more affordable for people who wanted to, just mess around with it competitively a little bit. Also, for a while there, especially with Tron moving away from regular Emrakul, you did not have as many shuffle effects in the field. So that also makes sense that you could do that. I think it's pretty appealing to know that you can just cast lightning bolts that are they're worth more than 3 damage, if they're in the form of 10 cards or whatever. So I know it appeals to a lot of people. I will say though that game plan is pretty disruptible and also like hard. They don't deal well with any sort of disruption and a clock. If you just let them do what they're going to do, then yeah, sure. But they can't fight through a lot of counter magic consistently, and all of their cards are kind of just bad. And also with there's a bunch of decks running around that are any Through the Breach deck running around is going to have enough Emrakuls that yes, you're going to play Surgicals, you're going to extract those, but sometimes that you can get halfway through a deck and then they get their Emrakul reset, and you don't have the cards in hand now to do it. I know depending on the build, there's some cards like Fraying Sanity, for example, that can help keep it so that each card is pretty impactful. But I don't know. I just don't see it. I've certainly played, I'm not trying to be really down on the deck. I've certainly played against it a number of times, even locally, but also I played against it in opens before as well. And it's one of those things where, at first you can just go, okay, there's a Hedron grab. But if you really aren't paying attention or aren't presenting a clock, then you can start to feel the sweat a little bit. Now, granted, both times I've played against it in actual open, constructed matches that way, I did have Emrakul in my deck, so it felt okay. But I don't know. There's just so many random decks in this format, too, that you can incidentally help. I certainly don't want to be the guy who sits down for Mill and then plays against Dredge. Better hope you have a lot of extractions. So, I don't know. I would be wary of playing it, and I really don't have a plan for it. Counter Magic works just fine, and for myself, playing Geist of Saint Draft also works just fine. So I know Dave is playing a deck that has Emrakul in the main deck, so he's probably okay. And even like Tron, if Tron maybe I really don't know how that matchup goes. I don't know what kind of disruption the mill deck might play, but I'd have to assume that they still have a pretty hard time with an early Karn or a Wormcoil Engine. They've got to. That's the trick when you're playing a card or a deck like Mill, where you have to have enough cards that are milling your opponent, but you also can't just not be interactive because your cards don't do anything. I compare Glimpse to like a better Lightning Bolt, but to be fair, Lightning Bolt can always go to the other permanent and to a creature, to a planeswalker, or whatever, and the Mill cards never can. So it really adds a layer of tension that other decks don't have. So no real plan. Get lucky to have Emrakul in your deck, or just play up Counter Magic. I will say, if you do get paired against this deck, do not be shocked at how they can go from doing nothing, like a couple turns where they just look like a weird blue-black control deck, and then all of a sudden, like a set of Frank Sanity comes down and they hit you with Glimpse the Unthinkable, and you have 20 cards less in your deck, and you might be facing lethal the turn after that. So it can be explosive the way the deck is set up now. So just make sure that you are paying attention to what your opponent is doing, and if you lose to Mill, just like I said for the Rogue decks, don't get tilted. Everything is fine in Modern. You can do what you want. So. All right, I think that's it for what I have for questions right now. We had a couple just because we had the show from the night before, but I'm really excited to play Modern. We've looked at the format, we've seen how it's sort of changed. It's been really kind of fun to see a metagame evolve again, where this time last year you were talking about bannings because decks were too good, and then that brought us into things like the Grixis version of Death Shadow becoming very popular, and then Eldrazi Tron becoming very popular, and now Jeskai becoming popular, and then big mana decks coming back, like regular Tron. It's really fun to see, when Standard has been so stale, when you can literally play the 4-color energy deck from then to now. Having a format that has shown a healthy metagame, new cards have broken into it. I think it's very fun, and I'm excited to see what happens this weekend. So, especially since this is, this and the next few events are going to start being warm-ups for what the Pro Tour looks like. Because, unlike Modern, yes, Rivals may have some cards that affects Modern, but unlike Standard, I should say, Modern here, people, unless they've truly broken it, they're going to want to try out what they're doing. So, we'll see what happens. Quickly, I do want to mention other awesome sponsor, BCW. They are also going to be at Comic Town tomorrow. I'm recording this on Thursday, so on Friday, doing their challenge event, which is pretty cool. If you've not done this before, you come on up, you schedule with their manager. He then sets you up to play against one of the members of Team BCW who's going to be there. It looks like Tan and Grace, Ross Miriam, I'm sorry, the Tan and Grace, my apologies. Ross Miriam and Brendan DeCandio are all going to be up there, so you can challenge them. I might need to challenge Brandon again. I've gotten crushed by him a couple times now, and I'm sad about that. But I beat Ross in a match where I was not deserving of the win. He flooded too much. But I'm going to go ahead and leave that one lie. I'll stay undefeated for now. But if you do win, you do get a free pack of their Elite deck guards, which these sleeves are awesome. We've told you about this. But you just get to sit down. You get to pick the format as far as constructed formats go, Standard, Modern, or Legacy, and just play a match of Magic. They're always friendly about it. If these are people you watch stream or you're interested in, that's great. And if you manage to beat them, you feel good and you get free stuff. So come on out. Comic Town has 3 different events for FNM, both Modern, Standard, and Draft, if that's your thing. So it's going to be huge. There's going to be a ton of people up there on Friday, and you should come and check it out. All right, that being said, I'm going to move into the wrap-up. My timer shows me I'm at 28 minutes. I'm within my parameters, so good job me. Self 5. Yeah, got one of those. We have Star City Columbus this weekend. We have GP Santa Clara, which is team constructed, and that's legitimate team constructed. That's, no team unified anything. So looking forward to see how that works in the GP level. That's also the first paper Pauper events, so we'll see how those go. If they, hopefully for people who like Pauper, they go better than Frontier did, because I know there's a lot of people who around here who have started saying they're looking forward to that, and there's some Pauper events that have popped up. So we'll see. So that's going to be it for the show. I apologize if it was just me. If I make awkward noises or I talk too fast and I'm not your cup of tea, I'm sorry. If you turn in for Morgan's, lovely pipes, he'll be back next week. To be fair, he probably put himself somewhere on this episode here. If you are a Dave fan and you're waiting to hear him talk, why? Why are you a Dave fan? Come on. Morgan and I are obviously the best ones. See? He can't even respond. Good times. But anyways, if you do want to reach out to us or you want to ask us questions that we might answer on the show, you can do that by following us on Twitter. We are @YourEndStep because Morgan's really clever. You could give us a like on Facebook. Okay, we are at Your End Step on Facebook. You could also become a Patreon backer for us. Right now we have another contest going on. That contest gets chosen next week on the 8th. So if you are a backer at the $2 level, you automatically are entered, get an additional entry into that those giveaways. So if you want to score some of those elite deck guards, or deck boxes or anything, but you can't make it to Comic Town on Friday, for example, this is your way to get it while also supporting us, which we can't tell you how much we appreciate. Make sure you look for other shows on MTG Cast. We're very happy to be a part of that network, and there's a lot of great shows there. And of course, maybe if you feel like it, leave us a review on iTunes. It helps make us a little bit more visible, and we get to feel all warm inside because you express how much you enjoy us, I guess. See, I started these sentences and someone else is supposed to talk and give me banter back and forth, and I just sound awkward afterwards. All right, well, that being said, I think that's everything. So we'll talk to you next week. Have a good one. Bye.